Is that okay? Okay. My name is Viola Ford Fletcher. I'm the daughter of Lucinda Ellis and John Wesley Ford of Tulsa, Oklahoma. I'm the sister of Hughes Van Ellis, who's also here today. I'm a survivor of the Tulsa Race Massacre. 2 weeks ago, I celebrated my 107th birthday. Today, I'm visiting Washington, D.C. for the first time in my life. I'm here seeking justice, and I'm asking my country to acknowledge what happened in Tulsa in 1921. On May 31st in 21, I went to bed in my family's home in Greenwood. Neighbors of Tulsa, the neighborhood I felt asleep in that night, was rich, not just in terms of wealth, but in culture, community, heritage, and my family had a beautiful home. We had great neighbors, and I had friends to play with. I felt safe. I had everything a child could need. I had a bright future ahead of me. Greenwood could, Still, Greenwood should have given me the chance to truly make it in this country. Within a few hours, all of that was gone. The night of the massacre, I was awakened by my family. My parents and 5 siblings were there. I was told we had to leave, and that was it. I will never forget the violence of the white mob when we left our home. I still see black men being shot, black bodies lying in the street. I still smell smoke and see fire. I still see black businesses being burned. I still hear airplanes flying overhead. I hear the screams. I have lived through the massacre every day. Our country may forget this history, but I cannot. I will not. And other survivors do not, and our descendants do not. When my family was forced to leave Tulsa, I lost my chance of an education. I never finished school past the 4th grade. I have never made much money in my country. State and city took a lot from me. Despite this, I spent time supporting the war effort in the shipyards of California, but most of my life I was a domestic worker serving white families. I never made much money, but to this day I can barely afford my everyday needs. All the while the city of this Tulsa have unjustly used the names and stories of victims like me to enrich myself and its white allies through the 30s million raised by the Tulsa Centennial Commissioner while I was continued to live in poverty. I am a 107-year-old and have never seen justice. I pray that one day I will. I have been blessed with a long life and have seen the best and the worst of this country. I think about the horror inflicted upon black people in this country every day. This subcontinuum committee has the power to lead us down a better path. I'm asking that my country acknowledge what has been happened to me, the traumas and the pain, the loss, and I ask survivors and descendants to be given the chance to seek justice, open the door. All of you know how easy it is to deny that a violent mob threatened your lives and took your property. For 70 years, the city of Tulsa and its stream of commerce told us that the massacre didn't happen, like we didn't see it with our own eyes. You have me here right now. You see Mother Randall, you see my brother Hughes Van Ellis. We live this history, and we can't ignore it. It's our lives with us. Oh, my goodness. We lost everything that day, our homes, our churches, our newspapers, our theaters, our lives. Greenwood represented all the best of what was possible for black people in America and for all the people. No one cared about us for almost 100 years. We and our history have been forgotten, washed away. This Congress must recognize us and our history. For black America, for the white Americans, and for all Americans, that's some justice. Guess was that it. Thank you.
Do you want to say anything else?
I thought it was another page.
Do you want to say anything else?
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else you want to say?
No, that's not.
Thank you very much. We appreciate very much your testimony. Mother Fletcher.
I'm over Black Wall Street.
Okay.
This is all that's left.
Yeah.
And so this is just a show. I mean, social justice is great. We need that. But you will never have social justice until you have economic justice.
That is a Freeman Culver, president of the historic Greenwood Chamber of Commerce. Very interesting perspective there. I am joined by Jakara Hallman of News on Purpose. She was with me in Tulsa for the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Massacre. And Jakara, that was an interview you actually got. Why was the president of the Chamber of Commerce so upset?
So Dr. Freeman spoke about being upset because all around him, there are reporters and media that are coming there, and everyone is excited about everything that's happening as far as the president coming, as far as, the events and the hoorah. But he's looking at how many of them is actually speaking to himself and many of the other leaders that are actually boots on the ground, that is actually making the decisions, that is actually funding the businesses. So if you are going to capture what's actually happening in Greenwood and Tulsa, you want to talk to the people that are there.
Right.
And he's just looking at people go right past him.
And it's interesting. He said, I'm over Black Wall Street. This is all that's left. And so with me being there, also doing coverage independently as well, the observation that I made was, first of all, okay, there used to be 40 blocks of Black wealth, right? We know that 100 years ago, it was destroyed. But this is a community that has had 100 years to rebuild. And so I just kept asking myself, why had the community not been rebuilt? And to look around and see so much construction, I'm going to show you guys here. There was so much construction all around the area where Black Wall Street used to be. You see, there's a baseball field, there's apartments being built, there's condos. None of these things are being owned by Black businesses. These are all construction that is being developed for white-led corporations. And so I started to understand why the president of the Chamber of Commerce was so frustrated and why he was also calling out the president and saying, why is the president not meeting with him? Because he oversees economics. So really, when you think about it, what was it all about? And Jakara, can you share, we did some research in our preparation for the coverage we did. Can you share what you learned about what really happened to Black Wall Street after the massacre? We know that there was a period of rebuilding, but what ended up happening?
Yes, so I spoke with not only the president of the Chamber of Commerce, but I actually had an opportunity to get into one of the businesses on the single block that now stand and represent Black Wall Street. And each of them talked about their just overwhelmed spirit of having to, be in the presence and the spirit of rebuilding, but also about 5 years thereafter, the destruction, the massacre, and the burning of this town, they attempted to rebuild. And that rebuilding was met with gentrification and public utilities and facilities. They have a stadium.
Right.
A stadium in the middle of what used to be known as Black Wall Street. They have a highway and bypass just completely in the center of what used to be their space to grow, to build, to create a legacy for their family.
And I thought it was very interesting because we watched a lot of the mainstream media coverage, and I didn't see anything on the urban renewal, the gentrification that had happened in the district and how that plays a role of where the community is today. And so for those of you who are just joining us, I'm independent journalist Georgia Fort, joined by Jakara Hallman of News on Purpose. We were both on the ground doing coverage in Tulsa for the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Massacre. And our observations of what was transpiring on the ground was very interesting. I noticed that the event to honor the survivors, right? There was this huge event that was planned. It got canceled. And in doing some digging and research, learned that this hasn't been confirmed yet, but from a very reliable source, the big event was canceled because survivors and descendants of survivors were asking for a portion of the proceeds from the event, and the commission denied their request. And so when the artists and the entertainers who were set to perform at that event learned about that, they pulled out. And there was this ripple effect of all of these events that were supposed to happen in honor of the 100th anniversary ended up being canceled. And so I also thought it was interesting that the president of the historic Greenwood Chamber of Commerce said that it was all really just a show. I want you guys to take a listen. He was pretty upset and disappointed by the lack of authenticity that surrounded all of the commemorations that were happening. Take a listen.
Right? And we know the pain is there, right, from these descendants. But you got to do your study and your research, Mr. President. You're not even talking with the right crowd. I'm over Black Wall Street, and I'm not even meeting the president. We're doing the work, but we don't have access to capital. You get what I'm saying? This is an injustice, and it's not the president's fault. It's our own community's fault. It's not racism, it's tribalism. And so all this media attention is going to people that's calling for reparations, that's not going to get it. And we're here struggling. Let's get some economics to this place so it can be an example for other communities. Because this wasn't the only massacre, right? You had massacre like this in North Carolina. You had them in Rosewood, Florida. You had them throughout the Midwest. So let's do this right economically. I have 30 black businesses here. Let's grow them. Let's give resources to them. They're doing their best to have an impact in the community. They already producing $4 million in the community.
And so, I mean, he's looking for real change. He doesn't want, the parade, and he doesn't want all of the banners that we saw strung all across Greenwood. He wants the city to be rebuilt. He wants reparations for the businesses and the people who were impacted by the devastation that happened 100 years ago. And you would think in 100 years' time, you would be able to rebuild. But the reality of what happened in Tulsa was it wasn't just the massacre that was a gross injustice. It was the fact that this incident was classified for decades rather, as a riot. And so what happens when you classify an incident as a riot, you can't get insurance claims. You can't get the city or the state to pay any type of reconciliation payments for what happened because it was classified as a riot. And for so long, we learned about it. Those of us who did learn about it, we learned about it as the 1921 race riot. Right. And then to add insult to injury, now that it's being recognized as a massacre, correctly, let's correct the narrative. It was a massacre. Now that it's being recognized as a massacre, guess what? Well, you have exceeded the statute of limitations. And so you're no longer eligible for, and so it's injustice after injustice after injustice. Jakar, I'm curious to know from you what your biggest takeaway was from being on the ground in Tulsa for the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Massacre.
I think I said to you coming back to the room one time after I woke up at 5 a.m. to attend an event that was scheduled for 6 a.m. I said, I'm coming to understand and believe that everything here that is scheduled is not what it's supposed to be or seem. And so as we got on the ground, as we were able to speak to the residents and the survivors, we learned that there is one image that is painted by mainstream media, and there is the truth. What I learned is so many different stories and recollections of what actually happened to start this event, to initiate what was known as the riot. See, words hold power. When you call it a riot, then you're putting blame onto the people of the community. So there were so many different recounts of the true story, and many of them say that what's his name, Dick Rowland and Sarah Page was actually a couple. They were an item. And as we know, during that time, it was not okay for interracial relationships to exist. But even if you don't believe that to be true, you have to also understand that both of them actually left Greenwood once this event took place. Both of them left.
And I was really fascinated when I learned that the bottom half of the church, Mount Vernon, was the original basement of the church, and that it survived the bombings and the burning, and that they built upon it. And now they've dedicated that bottom half of the basement, the brick wall, to be a prayer wall. And they've invited this to be an interfaith effort. And so there's all of these, beautiful, amazing stories of resilience and strength that have come out of Tulsa. But in being, based out of Minneapolis and knowing how much has happened in terms of like the racial reckoning movement after George Floyd, you would think, something this an injustice this grave would have there would be some type of reparation, some type of really meaningful rebuild that would happen. And in 100 years, you have the time to raise the money. And we're seeing they had time and money to build a highway straight through where Black Wall Street used to be. They had time and money to build a baseball stadium right where Black Wall Street used to be. They currently have the time and money to build apartments where Black Wall Street used to be. And so when you really go into that community and you start asking the questions, not only what happened to Black Wall Street on June 1st, 1921, but what happened to Black Wall Street when Black people picked themselves up by their bootstraps and they started piecing their community back together in the 50s and the 60s. What happened was gentrification. And so this was a community that was not only plagued by the violence in 1921, but it was plagued by the injustices of gentrification. And I mean, it broke my heart to walk down Greenwood, what's known now as Black Wall Street, and see all of these markers on the ground. When you're walking on the sidewalk, you can see these: Grace Johnson's restaurant, Edward Durham's furnished rooms destroyed 1921, Roland Furniture destroyed 1921, not reopened, Dixie Theater destroyed 1921. Destroyed 1921, reopened. That was a leasing company. Dr. Travis, destroyed in 21 and reopened. But so if some of these businesses were reopened, then why don't we see them when we're walking? Where are they now? What happened to them? And so when you start really digging, you learn that Black Wall Street was destroyed again.
Yeah.
And that is why the president of the Chamber of Commerce is upset. That is why he called this 100th anniversary commemoration a show. That's why he said, I'm over Black Wall Street, because this community has been done wrong by their city officials, their state officials, over and over again. That was my takeaway, Jakara. I know I have my own, ideas, and I've done some different, research and interviews that have led me to that conclusion. Yeah. What was your conclusion leaving Tulsa and leaving Black Wall Street?
My conclusion is that they are owed reparations. They are owed their due diligence. My conclusion is, I have so many questions actually walking away. Like, what would that theater have been today? That could have been the next Marriott, the next Holiday Inn, or, just if they had been able to live Hyatt, Trump, hotel, something big. Had they been able to live and continue and strive? Obviously, I did see for myself that it was a show, that some people showed up for pictures and commentary. I actually had an opportunity to go inside of Vernon AME Church, and they had a table paying homage and in remembrance of some of the members. But obviously there's not enough space for everyone who lost their lives and their business and everything they owed.
And to know that they have archaeologists who are still digging up mass burial sites. So the death toll as we know it is still increasing. The more that they research this horrific event. Originally, I think reports said that there was 30 or 40 people who were killed.
Right.
And then the archaeologists started digging up these mass burial sites, and that death toll has increased. And even as we were leaving Tuesday afternoon, there were reports coming out that the archaeologists were still doing more testing and still doing more digging and finding more human remains. So this now I think the death toll is upwards of 200, between 200 and 300 people were killed. Mm-hmm. But we won't really ever know for sure, because there was so much cover up that was done. The individuals who were involved in this were, very, they did their due diligence in making sure that it didn't seem as bad as it really was. And so when you go to the extent of picking up bodies and laying them in mass burial sites, not even giving people proper burials, the lack of humanity in that is unbelievable. And it is a shame. America ought to be ashamed. When you look at this history, our country ought to be ashamed that we have survivors. The Mama Fletcher, 107 years old, goes and speaks before Congress and still has not received any reparations. And to your point, Jakar, about the hotels, Stratford had a hotel. Yep. He was one of the last people that was pulled out of Black Wall Street, because after they burnt down all of the buildings, then they started kind of rallying everybody together, all the Black people together, to be stationed or be safe at like the convention center, like these larger gathering areas. And Stratford remained in his hotel. He was one of, I think, about 4 or 5 hotels on Black Wall Street. And he was high up enough where he could actually shoot out his window. Yeah. Eventually, they talked him out of his hotel. They got him to come out, and they burnt it down.
And they promised him.
When you look at someone like Stratford, he not only had the hotel, but he also had about a dozen other properties, and he very well could have been on his way to be the next Marriott or one of these big hotel chains. But you would never know because it was taken from him.
We could have been going to the Stratford,
right? Man, and so I went on this trip thinking that it was going to be a moment to connect with heritage and, commemorating Black excellence. And it actually, I kind of left angry. I left angry that there has been this opportunity to reconcile, and no one has seized that opportunity, that the city and state officials in Tulsa have the opportunity to be on the right side of history. And while they planned this beautiful event and they commissioned all of this artwork to go up all across the city, they have not done the very basic thing that would reconcile what happened.
Right.
Which is
take care of those families, those survivors.
Exactly.
Like, why are they still struggling?
Exactly. And so, it is disheartening to know that in this city where you had 40 blocks of Black wealth destroyed and now reduced down to just a block. Yeah. And that block ends by the highway. Mm-hmm. And it is surrounded by all of this corporate construction. And so we thought it was important following our trip to Tulsa to take this time to debrief with you guys, to unpack some of the things that we observed, to share with you some of the conversations that we had with individuals in passing. Jakar, is there anything else you want to share about our time in Tulsa and covering the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Massacre?
Overall, this trip was very, very, very bittersweet. Anytime someone asked me about it, I said that high highs and low lows. One thing we also learned is just how divided the city is, and just the lack of effort being put in by the city officials, the mayor, the governor. They speak one thing, but then their actions show another. Check out the bills and the laws that have been passed, including, things in recognition of Trump. And so just being in that space and learning of that really was disappointing. And I understand why the president of the Chamber of Commerce is disappointed.
Absolutely. Before we go, we will play that clip for you again of the president of the Chamber of Commerce. Before we do that, you guys make sure that you follow Jakara Hallman, News on Purpose. She's another independent journalist who's always on the ground doing phenomenal work. She is also in the military. And I'm very proud to see you living both worlds of media and military. You have a very special gift of meeting people and just making them feel comfortable. And so I'm proud to be on this journey with you. Make sure you guys follow her, subscribe to her channels. When you mentioned the thing about Trump, you guys, if you go to my story, and also make sure you're following and you're subscribed to my channels as well. But if you go to my story on Facebook or Instagram or on TikTok, you'll see I actually captured the moment where Trump supporters were driving around in Tulsa, in Greenwood, on Black Wall Street, the day when the president came in to commemorate this horrific history, right? And they had their flags flying that said F Biden, just going up and down the streets, right on Black Wall Street. And it was so disrespectful on, this day where you have our elders, our community elders, coming and asking for something very traumatic that happened to them to be commemorated. And yeah, you guys can see that. We're going to end on the president of the Chamber of Commerce. He's very upset and very disappointed by the lack of action.
Yeah.
For lack of a better way to put it, he was very disappointed in the lack of action that people have taken surrounding rebuilding Black Wall Street. Thank you guys so much for tuning in tonight.
We know the pain is there, right, from these descendants. But you got to do your study and your research, Mr. President. You're not even talking with the right crowd. I'm over Black Wall Street, and I'm not even meeting the president. We're doing the work, but we don't have access to capital. You get what I'm saying? This is an injustice, and it's not the president's fault. It's our own community's fault. It's not racism, it's tribalism. And so all this media attention is going to people that's calling for reparations, that's not going to get it. And we're here struggling. Let's get some economics to this place so it can be an example for other communities. Because this wasn't the only massacre, right? You had massacre like this in North Carolina. You had them in Rosewood, Florida. You had them throughout the Midwest. So let's do this right economically. I have 30 Black businesses here. Let's grow them. Let's give resources to them. They're doing their best to have an impact in the community. They already producing $4 million in the community.